Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar, IoT Business Transformation, Applying IoT Components to Transform End Customer Business. I'm Justin Sargent and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's webinar will be presented by TBR Devices Principal Analyst, Ezra Gottheil, and TBR's Professional Services Principal Analyst, Patrick Heffernan. The presentation will share insights found in our Internet of Things research. If you'd like to learn more about this research, please reach out to myself or one of the analysts after the presentation. Now, before we begin the presentation, there are a few things I'd like to cover. First, we will be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the previous presentations we've posted. Second, I will be following up with all of you via email tomorrow afternoon with the link to today's recording as well as with the slides from today's presentation, so please be on the lookout for that. And finally, we welcome questions from the audience at the end of our presentation. Please send any questions you have through the Q&A function, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Now with that, let me hand this over to Patrick and Ezra.
Excellent, thanks. So Ezra, we should probably do a little bit of introduction. What we have up there, just titles. I'll go first. So I'm Patrick Heffernan, and I run our professional services practice. Here at TBR, professional services for us includes everything from IT services through management consulting, digital marketing services, public sector IT, healthcare IT services, business intelligence. I must be leaving something out, but it's too much. So for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to talk mostly about services, IT services, how they fit into the space and what we're seeing. Ezra, you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. I'm Ezra Gottheil. I'm the principal analyst covering devices, platforms, and the Internet of Things. In this case, the question is, how does the special demands of the Internet of Things affect the services that are necessary to compete in that space?
And so what is on this slide, if it comes up correctly, there we go. We're going to talk about, I'm going to bring them up all at one time here. This is what we're going to cover today. Ezra's going to go through IT-OT convergence, how that's been evolving over the last couple of years and accelerated in the last couple. We're going to talk about what I would call sustained uncertainty and emerging trends. That is actually not a contradiction in term. There are a lot of things that we don't think are going to change within IoT, and part of that is a lot of the uncertainty around what it actually means and how it's going to spill out. But we can look at a couple of emerging trends and point to them and say where we think the market might be going. And then finally, I'm going to highlight a couple of these services vendors, actually more than a couple. I'm going to go into 5 or 6 of them and talk about what strategies they are using, what go-to-markets strategies they're using around IoT, where we see them now, and of course where we think those strategies and those services vendors are going to go. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ezra to walk us through the first part, which is IT-OT convergence.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. We have used this metaphor for a while. I still think it's applicable, which is to say that IoT is like climate change. That is to say, it's been going on for a long time, and it is going on at an increasingly rapid pace. It's a real thing, and it's accelerating. Nevertheless, there continues to be uncertainty about how fast it's going to occur, what the impacts are going to be, and how vendors in both the IT hardware, software, and in the services space will take advantage of the opportunities in IoT. The context here is that basically from an IT point of view, an IoT solution is mostly an IT solution. That is to say, the new stuff is the sensors and networks that feed it, but everything else is kind of familiar pieces, if pieces that have yet to fully mature, like some of the analytics pieces. So you've got data, you collect it, you bring it in typically through a gateway, and from there on, it looks like an IT solution. In all cases, these solutions are, not in all cases, but almost all cases, the IoT data are integrated with data already present in the organization, embodied in existing IT solutions. So there's a lot of IT pieces in your IoT pie.
Well, one thing I got to say here, when in conversations with client services, IT services clients, and conversations with IT services vendors, I don't think anyone, I know no one, has quite this full, complete picture when they think about IoT. For the most part, both clients and the IT services vendors know, deeply understand, and appreciate a few of these Lego pieces, but not, am I allowed to say Lego? Maybe not. A few of these puzzle pieces.
Are in the
all right. But not all of them. So it's an important aspect of what causes that uncertainty and the confusion around what is IoT and how is it going to impact my business, that for a lot of people, they don't have this complete circle of all the different components that go into IoT. Had to get that out there.
So because of this, because most of these solutions incorporate large pieces of IT, this is an opportunity, not only is this an opportunity for IT vendors, but in fact it's an opportunity they've been taking advantage of for a good long time. As I said, there's a long backstory to the IoT story, and there are many solutions out there that now would be called IoT, but were not at the time called IoT. So the similarities are that once you've got the data, you've got to connect it to all the assets through a network, you've got to store it, you've got to compute with it, you've got to provide security to it, and you've got to analyze the data. IoT puts pretty strong demands in general on analysis, but that's also happening now with data that is acquired in other ways. So at the same time, when you're building these kinds of systems, the demands for services are quite similar. So you need consulting, and we're going to talk separately about business consulting, which is somewhat different, but you need IT consulting. You need to architect these things and design them. You need to integrate them and build them and code them, and then you've got to manage them once they're up and running. Security is both the same and different. It's the same in that you have the issues of threats and assessment of risk and protection and privacy and all that. What's different is the risks in many cases are higher because you're now dealing with the physical world, and because you are connecting pieces of a business that have not in the past been connected. In many cases, there's a lot of data flowing around in the operations technology piece of the business, the part of the business that actually makes things or moves things or delivers things. But the data are kind of secured because they're not connected to the internet. The nature of IoT is they're connected to the internet, and all of a sudden, the data are more vulnerable, and the actual things that generate them are often more vulnerable, because IoT is not just about sensors. It's often also about effectors, things that actually can be modified through the network. This places demands on the services necessary both to provide ongoing security and also to design the security solutions.
Yeah, and the security part of it too, I'm going to come back to this towards the end of this webinar, but it really is an element that both, it's baked into every one of the IT services vendors out there bakes a cybersecurity package into their IoT offering and into most of their IT offerings, or I guess all of them. But it actually does separate out, it's an easy way to separate out some of the vendors who have invested more, who are ahead of the game. I think of a company like Accenture and the recent acquisition of Fusion X, which I think is a perfect example of a company thinking further down the IoT implications of security, exactly what Ezra just went through. Those kinds of investments, I think, will pay off tremendously down the road. Again, I'll come back to that at the end when we talk about where the vendors are going. But it's just something to keep in mind throughout this. There are probably two big themes, both industry and security, that underlie all of this. Am I right, Ezra?
Yes.
Okay, good. I like to get that nod, make sure I'm okay. All right. And now we're trying to change slides. There we go. The differences.
So when we look at the difference between IoT applications and other kinds of IT applications, because these are IT applications as well, what we're looking at now in IoT is a lot of newly invented applications. Of course, the existing ones have existed for a while, but we don't have the broad classes of similar horizontal applications like CRM or ERP. We've got specific, vertically specific, and often company-specific applications. And this generates some demands for collaboration and integration in the business among not just IT and OT, as we've spoken about, but business management too, because we're inventing new things. The things need to be invented in keeping with the business strategy of the company, and we have to integrate the pieces of the company and keep them going forward together. This isn't just let's all get together, decide what we're going to do, and then we'll go back to our silos. This is stay together because the company going forward is going to be operating in closer concert. Now, this IoT is the intersection of IT and OT is absolutely true, but it's also wonderfully linguistically cute because you've got the IT and the OT and all that kind of stuff. But it's absolutely true. So you've got IT, which is an organization that is not all that different from one industry to another, from one company to another. It's got the same standard pieces and it's got the same standard processes. And then you've got OT, and that's much more varied. And these two organizations are going to be working together going forward. They'll come together to design the solutions in keeping with the business strategy, and then they'll work together going forward to keep them running, to optimize them, to modify them, to secure them, all those things. And it's not easy to do. It's not easy from a technical point of view, and it's also not easy from a cultural point of view. These are organizations, as many organizations inside a company, that have their own individual pride that is in many ways opposed to the other organizations. You know, we are the company. So there's real cultural differences to be bridged here, and as I said, they have to be bridged for this from now going forward. It's not a let's meet and make nice and get this done and then we can go back.
Yeah, and the cultural change is something that we see, particularly from the CNSI, the consulting and systems integration vendors, across IT, being able to handle change management, being able to handle the necessary cultural clashes that come with any kind of IT transition is something that some IT vendors do very well, some consultancies do very well, and many of them simply outsource to a management consultancy or someone else too.
Let's just do a little definitional thing. Operations technology is OT. So, and that is as different as you can possibly imagine. In some cases, it's manufacturing machines. In some cases, it's trucks. In some cases, it's medical instruments. But there's a grand class. The interesting thing about OT is that while it was for a very long time analog, for the last couple of decades, it's been digital. It's just been keeping its data amongst itself, and now it's going to have to integrate it with the rest of the system.
So IT is the data warehouse, OT is the air conditioning unit that makes sure that the data warehouse doesn't overheat.
Right.
Okay.
And if you look at modern air conditioners, they have digital readouts.
Right. All right, likely outcomes.
Take it away.
I will take this away. So, and I'm going to throw them all up here right away. One of the things that we're seeing right now when it comes to this IT-OT convergence and where IoT sits at the very moment is something that I guess you could call hurry up and hesitate. There's a push, a very strong push from the consulting and the IT services vendors to encourage everyone to have a strategy, come up with a sound business plan, get leadership on board, and make sure that they've mapped out what their IoT strategy is and what the implications are of transitioning to an IoT environment. And at the same time, despite the warnings and the advice to go slow and ensure that they've got a strategy in place, the other emphasis is on do something now. Get your foot in the water, make a transition now because you're already behind. And I think that kind of clash on the surface really reflects a couple of things. I think it reflects where IoT is with respect to both the hype cycle around it. We're sort of at the early stages of this, despite what Ezra said at the very beginning about how IoT's been around for a while. The hype around it is still relatively new. And the knowledge of what IoT actually is. I think it also reflects a lot how IT services vendors in particular are still adjusting to some of the alliances and to some of the technology that underlies this. There are, within the last couple of years, we've seen a number of major alliances pop up between both IT services vendors and, say, a Siemens or a Hyundai, which are manufacturers, actual product manufacturers. And then you see, the alliances with cloud companies and IT services vendors, or software companies, Accenture and SAP, for example, getting together. Those alliances are still new. What they can offer and how they're going to offer it and how they're going to go to market with it, that's still evolving too. So I think that's another reason why you've got this this hurry up and hesitate going. And I think it also reflects how consulting-led IT services has been an emphasis of late from a lot of the IT services vendors we look at. I'll go into more of that at the end. So that's the hurry up and hesitate. Why end-to-end does not equal differentiation? I think what we see from a lot of IT services vendors who have put their toe into the IoT space is that they're coming to the table with essentially three strengths. One is around industry, around vertical experience and expertise. The other is around technology. If you look at an IBM, for example, it certainly has a long history of being on the leading edge in technology. And then a business expertise, a strength in business consulting. Ezra mentioned the IT consulting. If you sort of lump all that together around consulting and the full systems consulting and systems integration package, I think most of the IT services vendors with their IoT play are saying, look, we're strong in industry, we're strong in technology, we're strong in business consulting. The downside to that and why being that kind of end-to-end provider is not really providing any differentiation is because most clients that we talk to do not believe that they need help with all three. They might believe that they already have the technology in place, they just need to apply it better to their industry. They might have the technology and they know their industry better than anyone else, but they need help on the management consulting or the business consulting side. And of course, very few clients would say they don't know their own industry. So I think a lot of the IT services vendors that have not quite gotten hold of what's happening in IoT are the ones that haven't found a way to say that they're particularly special in any one area or have any particular strength that they can bring to the table, but are still trying to be everything to everyone, still trying to be end-to-end. And then finally, FUD becomes CUD. We had a funny discussion earlier this morning, Ezra and I, because he wasn't sure what I meant by CUD. CUD is actually the stuff that cows chew up. I meant that as literally as it looks on there. And FUD, of course, is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When that fear, uncertainty, and doubt becomes a connected cow, that's when you've got a supply chain that's actually bringing the farm closer to the consumer and bringing the consumer back to the farm. It's beginning to harvest that data, both out of your supply chain and, of course, out of the clients themselves, the customers themselves. And eventually, over time, what you get is less fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and probably less CUD, but you actually end up with a connected cow that's providing data, that's providing a data stream that can be useful in the retail space, it can be useful in the supply chain space, it can be useful in logistics all across the board. So I think one of the major lessons, the likely outcomes we're seeing with IoT is that it really is going to change the business model so that a dairy producer that connects its cows through an IoT solution is actually becoming in many ways a data company as much as a milk company. And of course, we'll come back to a little bit of that towards the end. We'll go back to Ezra now for the different types of IoT.
So we're beginning to see a range of solutions here. Our goal here is to eventually come up with a typology so we can say you want to build something similar to this but different in the following ways. So some IoT solutions are evolutionary and incremental. They take a process that's currently underway and they either make it more effective or more efficient. They reduce costs or they deliver better product or service. And this is typically things that kind of instrument current production lines, current devices, current vehicles, and say, let's make sure they're optimized, let's make sure they're operating most efficiently, let's take care of the maintenance of those things, let's make sure they're up and running more off at a higher percentage of the time. Then there are small and large. There's a lot of talk about big, total change, world-changing IoT solutions, and they are happening, and they will happen, and they're important. However, in many cases, a relatively small project, the connected cow, for instance, is something that can be done, that's feasible, that you can move forward on, And you can work out an IoT strategy in an incremental fashion rather than in a kind of transformative and business model changing fashion. So that's the other. We're going to change our business. We're going to go from one kind of business to another. We're going to go back and strategize, come up with a new solution. Then we're going to do some change management, and coming out of it, we're going to have something very, very different. At the same time, given that some IoT solutions have been in place for quite a while, another dimension that's kind of orthogonal to these two is mature versus new. If you've been doing this for a while, then you've got the organizational integration underway. You can do new things more easily. You understand what the strengths and weaknesses are. You can assess the risks and move forward. Whereas if you're new and you're taking on a large-scale project, you may very well be in the hurry up and hesitate situation. I want to do something. I want it to be revolutionary and transformative, but the risks may be something that cause me to want to find a way to get there, if not incrementally and iteratively, at least with pilot projects and small-scale deployments.
So how much of that, though, is a risk decision, and how much of it is a budget decision? So if you're going to dip your toe into IoT, and it's only taking a small slice of your IT budget, and actually maybe you get some of the line of business guys and the OT guys in the room to pony up some cash too, that's much easier to do, right?
Certainly. So there's two kinds of risk. There's financial risk and there's business model risk.
Yeah.
And if you're taking on something that doesn't cost a lot, you can start with a relatively low budget and deploy it. But if you're changing your business model at the same time, even at a relatively low cost, there's risk involved there. Dell has been particularly focused at entry cost, and it introduced the new gateway starting at $11.99 that basically says, why don't you get started? They also have labs in which you can try your IoT solutions, and again, that's likely to be used by companies that are doing this on a small scale, at least at first.
Yeah.
Vendors who are promoting large-scale transformative kinds of solutions have told us that at this point, many of their customers are at the proof of principle, right, prototyping and pilot testing phase, because you want to be really sure you're doing the right thing, right, if you're incurring large risks.
So that Dell sort of catch line of why don't you just get started? That's perfect with the whole hurry up and hesitate,
yeah,
you know? So it feeds right in. All right. Look at the vendors themselves.
So in the world of vendors, we've got a bunch of companies. As I said, IoT's been around for a while. So we've got a bunch of companies that actually have IoT experience. They've provided the networks, the services, the servers, you name it, to what in fact would now be categorized as IoT. This is largely in the world of IT where that's happened. They're IT vendors, they've had IT projects, and at one end of them is a network of sensors, and therefore it's an IoT project. But this has been compartmentalized. They would have to go back through their whole history of projects and say, oh, I didn't realize we've been doing IoT back in the late 20th century, but in fact, many of them have. And so therefore, their IoT experience is implicit and needs to be made explicit, both for a marketing purpose to say, hey, this isn't our first rodeo, and also for the organization to realize that this is something they already have, and they can bring that experience to bear to inform the new projects.
And one thing I just want to point out on the slide, because it reinforces what we talked about before, security is on there 3 times at least that I can see, right? Yeah, we've got it packaged around that middle layer of IT. We've got it the foundational piece of the puzzle. It's a puzzle, not a Lego piece. This whole thing. And I would even say you can put it right under, or right on top of consulting as well. It's so baked in that it's across everything. All right, implications.
So the implications for customers are, if you've been doing it for a while, then you're in a position to continue to do it fairly well. So if you have the IoT experience, even if you're taking on a new IoT project, you've got the experience with integrating IT and OT, you've got the experience in in the change management, you're ready to go forward. With the case of vendors, because this information tends to be compartmentalized and implicit, they still have to acquire skills to play effectively in the IoT space. And
sorry.
There we go.
There we
go. That the skills involve, to a large extent, the kind of integration and coordination that the customer organizations have to evolve. They've been delivering products that have been built, these interlocking blocks. That's what.
Here we go. Interlocking blocks.
That are put together into IoT solutions. But if they want to be an IoT factory, they have to know how to build them together, and that's a skill set. They also have to market them together.
Right.
So if we look at the OT, the things technology, just briefly to look at what it is, it's a good deal older than IT. That's the 19th century, early 20th century technology. It's called operations technology. It's incredibly diverse. What's in steel making is different from what's in automobile making. It's different from medicine. But it does involve a lot of data, and it's been digitized for decades.
Last point.
And when you talk about a gateway is a nice unit. It makes sense. It separates IT from OT, but it also is kind of a symbolic gateway. It's where these two organizations meet.
So now we'll shift a little bit to what some of the IT services vendors are doing in this space. And the way I wanted to do this, at TBR, we have a tendency to play to our own strengths, and that is looking at the vendors, the individual vendors first, and building up our understanding of them, and then putting all that together into a benchmark. And for today's webinar, I thought because it's as broad a topic as IoT, and it's more of that sort of horizontal play, what I wanted to do instead is talk about what strategies we've seen from the different IT services vendors, particularly with respect to their investments and their go-to-market approaches when it comes to IoT. So I've got up here 4 different strategies. They are, of course, they're not exclusively deployed. There's no one who's doing only one of these, and nor really are there examples, I think, of one vendor locking up the strategy all for themselves. It's all quite fluid. I think if you look at any one of the vendors in any snapshot in time, you could see a different one of these strategies. But I'll try to use examples across all 4 to explain what I mean. Consulting-led approach with the technology-heavy credentials and expertise. Think immediately, of course, of IBM and even of Accenture. These are 2 companies that have been at the forefront of an overall trend in IT services to bring consulting, and particularly strategy-led consulting, back to the front of IT services engagements. And honestly, it makes sense in the picture that we portrayed of confusion, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt all around IoT. And it plays to the strengths of these companies. I mean, IBM can certainly bring the widest range of technology to the table, but they also have the business expertise and arguably the industry expertise. But they've invested, by their calculation, $3 billion into IoT, set up a specific business unit dedicated to IoT. If the consulting-led approach is also probably the most marketing-heavy approach, I would say IBM wins the prize at the moment. For industry expertise, and this is one of those 3 things I talked about earlier that was the strengths that the IT services-led vendors bring to the table. And industry underscores and is foundational to everything in IoT. And Ezra mentioned it, it really is an area where, for other horizontals like CRM or supply chain, there may be enough commonalities between the industries that you can have one solution that fits most or fits all. I think IoT is different. Each industry is special and unique. And Ezra just a couple minutes ago mentioned the steel industry and the car industry. You could almost think those 2 things are very tightly interrelated, and of course they are. On the other hand, with respect to IoT, they're probably as different as the steel industry and the connected cow, back to that. So for industry expertise, I think of Atos in particular coming to the forefront, particularly around manufacturing, around what they call Industry 4.0. I think they're making an effort to take the expertise they have, particularly in the German manufacturing sector, and apply that and apply the IoT lessons there and solutions there across a wider market. With that said, I don't want to imply in any way that almost every single vendor doesn't recognize the importance of industry expertise as part of the go-to-market, but Atos sort of stands out. Atos also has an interesting alliance with Siemens, which is a good example of the strategy on the bottom right there, the innovation, co-innovation, IP, and alliances. Now, you may think that innovation and alliances are not the same kind of strategy. I think the key part of it there are the two middle words of co-innovation and IP. IoT is in no way, no one can deliver IoT-related services or technology across the entire spectrum alone. It has to be done with partners, with technology partners, with consulting and services partners. And to do that in an area like this that's emerging the way it has been, you're going to need co-innovation, you're going to need to develop some IP. So innovation and alliances are sort of at the two ends of this strategy spectrum, but they really come together in the middle. And we think about alliances, Accenture and SAP, of course, come to mind. They've had an IoT-specific alliance for a couple of years now. And innovation, I think actually, of course, IBM, and Watson, and we can disagree or agree on whether or not the latest Watson commercials are both IoT and understandable or completely hard to understand and read. But in any case, Cisco is probably an even better example of a company that has really made its go-to-market strategy for IoT around innovation. They have these 9 innovation centers around the world. It's what they tout as what separates them from others in this space. Again, innovation, but it's innovation as part of alliances. It's innovation co-developed with clients. And then the last part of it is platforms on the top right. Platforms first, services second. This is, of these 4 strategies, I think probably the least likely of a strong winning strategy. We see TCS as a company that has put their emphasis on interoperability. They've put an emphasis on their ability to deliver a platform and capabilities in concert with their technology partners that separates them. I don't think for most of the IT services vendors and for their clients in this space, in IoT, I don't think it's the platform that makes the difference. I think the platform in many ways, like security, is almost assumed. The expectation is that you're going to bring a certain level of interoperability and you're going to bring a certain level of IT expertise and capability to the table. That's what makes this IoT. So emphasizing or putting your go-to-market bet on the platform, I don't think is what's going to separate them, but it is clearly what some of the IT services vendors have been doing. So what's next? I think we're going to see some of those proof of concepts or proof of principles that Ezra mentioned earlier. They're going to start to become more than stories. The connected cows are going to become not just something you hear about at a conference, but something you begin to see more frequently day to day. They're going to become full-on solutions, and I think the solutions, there's going to be some lessons learned with respect to what's happened in the IT services space over the last few years, where those solutions are going to have an emphasis on standardization within an industry, of course, and remaining as simple as possible, sort of the simplest solution that will solve the problem. Ezra and I were talking earlier about the healthcare industry in particular being hamstrung by the difficulties around electronic health records or electronic medical records, and it's the complexity with which a lot of those systems were put into place that is making it difficult to move forward. So I think with IoT, we're going to see an emphasis on standardization. We're going to see an emphasis on simplicity. I think there are going to be 2 sort of longer-term trends that come out of that. One, we're going to see, I look at an example like Accenture's alliance with or partnership with Hyundai and the creation of the connected ships, and this is still something that's very much in development. But on the other hand, it's something everyone can understand right away. It's the same as, in many respects, as connected cars. It's like the preventative maintenance connectivity that's been baked into a lot of airplanes now. What happens is that a connected network, a connected device connected into a network, and then a device in this case, one of those massive ships, going from port to port, it actually, at the end of the day, what it does is it drives the analytics. You produce an enormous amount of data that has to be understood and has to be a component of solving a business problem, whether that's efficiency, whether that's speeding up your own delivery in the case of a ship, or making things more efficient and getting them done, or driving higher profits. But then analytics and all that data you're creating really ends up becoming a data business. You end up with, in the case of the connected cow, you end up with a understanding of a consumer who wants to be more connected to the farm. Well, that consumer has a certain set of data around it, and you can eventually see that the dairy company becomes something of a data company, selling information about the consumers that are bought into locally produced milk, that they want to be that connected to a farm. So I think we'll see that IoT in many ways through IT services will end up driving both connectivity that becomes analytics, that really becomes a data business model. And I think the other aspect of it that we're going to see long term, I think much like digital marketing services, much like business intelligence and analytics itself, I think the consulting firms, those large IT services vendors that have a substantial consulting arm, both business consulting and IT consulting, they're going to continue to be the ones that are the most profitable, that pull in the most money around IoT. The technology-centric companies, the folks actually making the chips and the folks that are actually making the devices, I think will eventually find that their profits are not going to be nearly as great as the people who are allowed to, actually that's exactly what I mean, who have the permission to come in and provide that consulting advice, provide that architecture, to plan it, to build it, to, in many cases, run it and manage those services. So I think over time we're going to see that. One point to that I think we will be watching to see how this develops is I think the security will have a bit of a maybe not a renaissance. I don't think it ever went away, but I think in the same way that we've seen over the last couple of years, digital and now IoT becomes sort of the most important, the biggest buzzwords. I think we're going to see cybersecurity and security become something that everybody touts as the difference between them and everybody else. Like I said, right now security is baked in. I think as security services, as they develop their own, what's the right word for it? As they become more, it's not differentiated. As you begin to see that there are levels of security that make a business difference, that is, are you hacked, are you not hacked, is not the first question. It's sort of the baseline question. It's whether or not you have a risk profile, whether or not you have a security partnership, a security alliance in place that allows you to operate fully and completely. I think as security becomes differentiated in that way, you're going to see, tied into that, of course, IoT, you're going to see a lot of the companies I was talking about with respect to consulting-led approaches being the ones that benefit most in the IoT space. And Ezra, what am I leaving out here?
I think what you see, one of the interesting things is how two parts of the organization, the IT, which is kind of uniform across companies, and OT, which is very diverse across companies, are going to have to find a way of integrating. So what we see, I think, in many organizations is a reorientation to a different kind of organization, where IT and OT work more closely together, and perhaps the analysis strategy becomes broken out. Also, in the services world, we look at an expansion of the world of OT services into closer to the horizontal piece of businesses.
Right. So with that, I guess we can take some questions. Anything else you wanted to throw out there, Ezra? No? Did I say anything just now that surprised you that you weren't expecting?
No,
Okay.
that makes perfect sense. I just had a thought that when we talk about security from a kind of top-down risk assessment point of view, I'm wondering about kind of monetizing it and selling it like insurance. underwriting the risks and
Right.
and having the expertise in
Right.
kind of assessing the risk and protecting against the risk lodged in financial services firms.
Right.
Rather than in
Well,
technology.
I mean, if every company is eventually going to be in the business of data, then the insurance companies are going to be the ones that run the world, right? I mean, there's no industry that...
It all comes down to financial services, doesn't it?
It all comes back to financial services, which is so reassuring given where we were with financial services in 2008.
Yes,
so,
there you go.
Yeah,
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? What could go wrong with connecting billions of things to the internet, right?
There
Everything's connected to the internet. So, yeah. So with that, we'll take a couple of questions. One of them we have is, I'm struggling on how to enter the market, i.e., do you need knowledge of an industry first before you create an IoT solution? I don't think we'll disagree, but I'll let you go first, Ezra.
Well, yes, in a word. You don't have to create an IoT solution to enter the market, however. If you've got a piece of the puzzle, if you've got a piece of software, a piece of technology that can be applied generally, then you can be in the market. But if it's an IoT solution that you're looking for, it comes from the business. It comes from the heart of the business and the business strategy. Now, we are actually implicitly, and I'll be more explicit about it, we are talking about commercial solutions. In commercial solutions, you have to understand the nature of the business you're selling to. In consumer solutions, you simply have to appeal to a large enough number of consumers. So we have a separate practice that under our devices practice where we cover the consumer end of this world. And then all it takes is the adequate empathy for a sufficient number of consumers and going off on a jump starter, and now you're an IoT solution provider.
Yeah, and I think it depends too on who you're going to sell to. I mean, I've had conversations with plenty of IT directors in a diverse number of businesses who do not in any way look to their services, their IT services provider, to talk to them about their industry. They know their industry inside and out. What they're more interested in, interestingly enough, is adjacent or sometimes even completely divergent industries, to say, well, if it's working over there, are there lessons that are learned that can be applied here? Are we going to see that in IoT?
That's our goal. Our goal here is to begin to see the parallels, to cross those vertical chasms and say, this really is sort of like that. And that was, in a certain sense, what happened when we ended up with the grand software horizontal solutions. They said, supply chain is a common way of thinking about it, whether you're in oil and gas or Coca-Cola.
Right.
That took a certain amount of imagination.
And so, but we're not going to get there, not anytime soon.
I haven't seen that light yet.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
Another question that came up, didn't Atos buy Siemens Services Operations a few years ago? Yes, that's true, but Atos and Siemens are rather closely aligned at the hip. They are still two different companies. They do go to market together in some ways. They do a lot of joint ventures. It's, if you look at some of the larger, I don't want to call them just heavy manufacturing companies, but, you look at the GEs, the Philips, what's the other German one, starts with B? That was in my head earlier. Bosch, yes, thank you, Bosch. I mean, it's possible that those companies, and I know we're talking today primarily about services, but it's entirely possible those companies become much more significant players in IoT, although they haven't necessarily been in the I part of it to date, right?
Right. So some, like GE, are saying, hold both feet, let's go.
Yeah.
We're going to be in the I part of it. Others of them are, the I is implicit. They basically say, we've discovered that running our factory floor is like with its own mini data center, makes it more efficient. But yeah, And they have a lot of industry expertise. Obviously, they have to work with their customers to deliver the goods. So in many cases, they become not only the vendor, the hardware vendor to industries, but also the services provider to those industries. They were already servicing the hardware anyway. Now they're extracting the information. And then there's a whole other layer of potential business that has to do with repurposing the data, and in many cases, these vendors are in a good position to do that. With the appropriate licensing and protection and privacy and all that, perhaps consolidating the data from multiple customers is the way to extract additional value from that data.
Right. And that's true for beyond just the heavy industry, the manufacturing guys too. We were talking earlier to get back to the Accenture's connected ships example. The connected ships is designed to help the shipping companies be more efficient. Fuel obviously being a huge component of their costs. But one of the implications or one of the end results of having a connected ship that's more efficient and better timing for going into port and not wasting time sitting outside a port is that you reduce the number of days that a ship has to sit to wait to get into the port of Hong Kong. You do that and you actually have an impact on the macroeconomic forecasting that's done by some of the Wall Street houses that look at things like how many days does a ship have to sit outside of Hong Kong. So you begin to create new data points, you begin to create new data packages that are way outside of the industry of whatever you were in. We had another question that came in. How could communication services providers benefit from IoT, A, in their operation, B, in the services they sell? You want to tackle that one first, Ezra?
I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
Well, there's an awful lot of equipment in providing communication services. And the equipment has to keep running.
Amen.
And it has to be optimized and tuned and all that kind of stuff. So customers as well as providers. Then, in terms of the services they sell, the kind of naive model of IoT is you send all your data back to some gigantic data center, either in your basement or in the cloud. But in fact, there's an awful lot of opportunities for data processing near the sensors, and this is a place where Dell has made some statements, but they're not alone. And there's a layer that's near the sensors that's not in the cloud, and that's one that the communication service providers have access to. So that processing the data, summarizing the data, consolidating the data, not all centrally, but closer to the sensors, has benefits in terms of efficiency, reducing storage demand, reducing network costs, and it also has benefits in terms of effectiveness, in terms of reducing latency. So if you're being a conduit for the data in an IoT solution, you have the opportunity to interpose yourself and say, why don't we process it? Right. Why don't we summarize it? Why don't we feed it back to you more quickly? Or why don't we simply provide guarantees as to service levels? So there's lots of opportunities. Lots of data is going to be flying lots of places driven by IoT, so there's the opportunity there.
So you just said guarantees as to service level, and I was expecting you to say guarantees as to security. Is that part of it too?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's another avenue. We have another question that came in. How are the companies deploying smaller IoT applications doing their analytics? Are there services implications? Why don't you take the first part of that in terms of deploying smaller IoT applications?
So when we think about analytics, we always get a little, the imposition of college statistics comes up, and we're thinking big data and bigger data. Analytics can be done with a spreadsheet. And if the project is small and the cost is small, you can gain considerable efficiency simply by running on a spreadsheet. Then there's opportunities in having access to some statistical tools as a service. That's part of Dell's update of Statistica, for instance, but they're not alone too. So when you scale down the project and scale down your ambition, you can gain efficiencies, you can reduce costs, you can drive better performance without the kind of imposition of a big data analysis package. But of course, in all cases, we face an expertise problem with analysis, small and large.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest services implication, is that we hear repeatedly from every single IT services vendor and software vendor, for that matter, there are not enough data scientists. I call them people unicorns. They're data scientists who's got an MBA and at least 5 years experience in a particular industry. So industry expertise, data scientist, business knowledge. Those people, there's not enough of them that exist. It's that simple. And it's been interesting to talk to some of the IT services vendors about how they're trying to mostly retrain folks that they already have. They've already identified as worth having in the company, and now they realize they need to repurpose them to do something else. And it's data science and it's analytics that is really there, which in its own way is kind of fascinating, because aren't we all supposed to be replaced by a computer anyway? So I guess not quite yet. Yeah. So one last question, I think, what do you think are the organizational implications of IoT? I'll go first, and I'll say that I think the change management has not been well enough understood across all of IT services, and with the implication all of IoT. Change management is something that has been provided as a consulting service for quite a while now. I don't think it's well done by a lot of the CNSI vendors themselves. I think you end up pulling in a lot of management consulting firms to do change management. I think it's probably, change management is changing. I think the firms are getting better at how they approach change management issues, but IoT, just by what Ezra was saying at the very beginning of this presentation about getting the IT and the OT people together, if it's hard enough to get IT and line of business people together to handle something like, an update to our CRM system, then the changes that are required in getting people to understand that the data that is generated through a connected device, who manages that data within a company, who has access to it, I guess, first, who manages that data, and who's authorized to act on that data. I mean, those are all baseline implications of IoT that have an impact on an organization. Ezra, other thoughts?
Well, I think I addressed this before. I think you see a uniting of significant parts of IT and OT, and I think you see a uniting of business strategy, business analysis, and data analysis. So you need to kind of change the way you organize so your groups focus on common areas of need and expertise.
All right, we do have time for one more question. I was looking at my laptop, which has the wrong time, as opposed to my iPhone, which has the right time. Ezra, tell me which one of those two, we got time for one left, tell me which one of those two you want to tackle.
Oh boy. What % of IoT tech spending and implementations would you say is by the tech channel, VARs, business industrial service providers,
versus enterprises, meaning the customers themselves, I think.
Okay.
So who's buying IoT? Is it the people that are supplying IoT, or is it the people that are implementing IoT? Yeah, so that's not quite a fine line, is it?
It's not, because in many cases what you've got is the enterprises are spending to build IoT that they are then incorporating in their physical products and selling to their end customers. You've got customers selling to customers further down the line.
Yeah.
But I would say that when we say end enterprises, given the fact that in a certain sense they may very well be middlemen,
right?
Those are the people who will be spending more in IoT.
Right. The middlemen are the ones that are doing the spending right now.
Right now.
Although it always changes, but that will certainly change. And so just building on that question, I mean, when you look at the IoT space, I mean, how do we at TBR distinguish between what's analytics, what's digital marketing services, what's IoT, what's SDN, what's management? I mean, well, now we're getting too far away, but how do we differentiate between IoT and some of the other elements like analytics, like connectivity that just come into play?
I'm tending to say that, and we're handling in terms of our benchmark the way we handled cloud. So IoT affects every piece of the IT industry.
Right.
And their revenues and profits are reported by every existing segment we've got. What we're basically looking at is how much of that is driven at some point in its food chain by an IoT solution. So analytics is analytics.
Right.
And we're looking at the analytics business, but then we're saying we think X% of it is being driven by solutions, by data coming in from things rather than data coming in from the web, which is really two major sources.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. I think that's all we have the time for. So, Ezra, this is enormously fun.
Oh, yeah.
I hope everybody got something out of it. You can, of course, reach out to us directly. We had our emails up there. I should probably put them up there again. And, of course, we're both on Twitter. We're both on LinkedIn. And you can always come and visit us here at the lovely offices of TBR in Hampton, New Hampshire.
Right next to Hampton Beach.
Right next to Hampton Beach, yes, where there was a climate change symposium thing yesterday. Yeah, yeah. So we need to have an IoT symposium.
And if your children are young enough, encourage them to study statistics. Okay. Didn't work for me, but it might for you.
Right. All right. Thanks. Justin, anything else? We all set?
No, I'd just like to remind everyone still on the line that I will be following up with all of you via email with the slides from today's presentation as well as with the link, so just be on the lookout for that. And additionally, please take our quick survey at the end of this. Once you close out, we're always looking to improve both the information we provide and how we provide it. So thank you, Patrick and Ezra, and thank you, everyone, for attending today.
Thank you.
Thanks.